Welcome to the book of Judges. We're in chapter 16. We're going to take it in two parts, this week and next, and then we'll take about a 6-week break, maybe 7-week during Thanksgiving, Advent, Christmas, and the week of New Year's. And then we'll be back for the last 5 chapters, which are a dual epilogue for the book. So we started with Samson a couple weeks ago. We're continuing with him tonight and next week, and he's the last of the judges in the book of Judges. Let's open with prayer. Heavenly Father, tonight as we investigate your word again, we pray that you would grant us your wisdom, give us your guidance, and especially lead us to trust in our great leader, Jesus. In his name we pray. Amen. Amen. Okay, so before we get into our Bible study proper, anybody have an opportunity this week for a prayer, a conversation, a meeting with someone who needs Jesus, or had opportunity to experience something like that? My wife and I we were at a restaurant a few days ago, and gosh, it must be 3 days ago now. And we did ask the server if we could pray for him, a young man. And the really kind of neat thing about that was that he said, well, my church just did a big fundraiser, and I'd like to give thanks for that. And they raised funds for people in Cambodia. I said it's a very large church. They raised $17,000. So that was really encouraging to hear. And you are reminded that there are Christians everywhere. And sometimes we look at young people, he's probably in his early 20s, and think, well, they don't necessarily want to know Jesus, do they? And yet you find that there are people, young and old, black, white, Asian, Hispanic, here and around the world who follow Jesus, the Messiah. And God has put his people all over the place. And so you can have an opportunity for an encouraging conversation like that, and you never know when it'll happen. Go to the other door. Ron, could you just lean out that door and tell him to come in this way?
I think it's
Oh, you think it's upstairs? Well, you check upstairs. Ron will check that door. Then I'll keep talking. How's that?
That's fine.
Because we're recording. Okay, so as we get into chapter 16 of Judges. It was upstairs? Okay. It was upstairs, guys, so we're good. As we get into Judges 16, last week in chapter 15, we saw what for Samson was his high point. And his high point, well, do you remember what his high point was before I just keep blabbing? What was Samson's high point? What does he realize about himself?
Well, he's now the leader of Israel.
That's right. So he's a leader. It's more than just him. He cries out to Yahweh after this tremendous battle, if you will, as he kills 1,000 Philistines. And Yahweh answers his prayer, gives him water, and then it says he led Israel for 20 years. Haha, there's that spider again. This time I got him. Haha! Yes. And the people on video have no idea what I'm talking about. All right, so yeah, in chapter 15, Samson realizes he is a leader for Israel. This isn't just about him. He's dedicated to Yahweh from birth, and now he's beginning to understand why. That's the high point, okay? And so as we get into chapter 16, we're going to see his downfall. So quite a few things to give you in the introduction today. This relates to the downfall and death of Samson, and we won't cover all of that tonight, but it's an introduction for the chapter, so that's why I'm doing it. And remember that Samson's account closes out the accounts of the judges. He's the 12th and last. His weakness for women is highlighted in this chapter. And just a question that one of the commentaries I have raised, which I thought was very interesting, and I'll bring this up later in the study, so you don't have to think about answering it now, but maybe just start thinking about it. Did Samson understand the danger of the game he was playing with Delilah? And if so, might he just have wanted to be normal? And we'll come back to that later. It's likely that the events of chapter 16 take place toward the end of Samson's years of leading Israel. And I'll talk about why that is. And the city of Gaza is prominent in this chapter. And Gaza is one of the Fab Five. It's one of the 5 Philistine cities. There's Ashkelon, there's Ekron, there's Gath, and I can never remember all 5 at once. It's just impossible for me to do that, I guess. Okay, so we get now proper into the book of Judges chapter 16, and we're going to read the first 3 verses. One day Samson went to Gaza where he saw a prostitute. He went in to spend the night with her. The people of Gaza were told, "Samson is here." So they surrounded the place and lay in wait for him all night at the city gate. They made no move during the night, saying, "At dawn we'll kill him." But Samson lay there only until the middle of the night. Then he got up and took hold of the doors of the city gate, together with the 2 posts, and tore them loose, bar and all. He lifted them to his shoulders and carried them to the top of the hill that faces Hebron. All right, so we have this conflict at Gath. So I said the city was prominent. We see it right away at the beginning. We're going to see it at the end of our time together tonight as well. Notice that Samson saw a prostitute. Saw, that's the word that I want you to focus on there. Let's take a look at chapter 14, verse 1. What do you notice that's similar?
Well, because the gal they wanted to marry saw her and decided he wanted to marry her, whether she was an Israelite or not.
That was Kyle.
Oh, okay. Sorry. No worries.
Is it sort of indicating lust?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if that's the word we necessarily have to use, but it's impulsive. He saw a woman, wanted to marry her in chapter 14. He saw a prostitute and he went in to see her. And so Samson's kind of going back, and I think I wrote this down here. He's going back to his impulsive ways. And so this is where Samson's very weak. He just sees something and he wants it, just like that. And as we saw when he was talking with his parents in chapter 14, this is the woman I want to marry, get her for me. He doesn't want anything or anyone to stop him. And he's kind of going back to that now. Okay, what else do I got here for you? Now, as Samson, he's in the house. He waits till midnight. He gets up and he leaves. The house is being watched and the city gates are being watched. And I found that interesting as I was reading it, that you hear about these big plans the Philistines are making. We're going to watch the house, we're going to watch him, and we're going to be at the gates. And they're not even mentioned in verse 3. And so it implies that they were no impediment to Samson at all. He was able to either run them off or kill them. And then he takes the gates. The gate may have weighed 5,000 pounds, and it was carried a distance of about 39 miles.
Oh my.
And I've got a map coming up here in just a little bit that will show a whole bunch of Samson's exploits, and I'll be able to show you the 2 places there. So obviously we're dealing with the miraculous here, aren't we? Just like when he tore apart a lion with his bare hands. You could get a dead lion and try to pull it apart. Even a really strong human would have great difficulty even dislocating the arm of a lion. And Samson was able to tear it apart. The text says like a young goat. It'd be just a little kid, just take the legs and tear it apart. And so God would grant him supernatural strength from time to time, and this is one of those times. Hebron was the capital of Judah at this time. Hebron was the town later, some years later, when David was crowned king of Judah and then of Israel. So this is before Jerusalem is made the capital. Okay, any questions about this first instance? It's not complicated, is it? But what it shows, there's probably some time that has passed because Samson's visiting a Philistine city again. So we look at chapter 15, and he's got the jawbone of a donkey, and he kills 1,000 Philistines. Obviously, he wouldn't go right into Gath next weekend. So probably some time has passed, and things have simmered down. And the other thing, too, is that, and I didn't write this on your study guide, but in all likelihood, Samson went there, not revealing his presence publicly. He didn't go there to negotiate or something like that. How do we know that? Because it says in verse 2, the people of Gaza were told Samson is here. And so somebody saw him, somebody recognized him. He went there covertly or casually, but certainly unannounced. And so you begin to see then, as soon as they find out, they're going to try and kill him. Okay, now we get to verses 4 and 5. Anybody feel like reading that? Wayne?
After he had loved a woman in the valley of Sorok.
Read that again.
After this, he loved
Okay.
a woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah. And the lords of the Philistines came up to her and said to her, seduce him and see where his great strength lies, and by what means we may overpower him, that we may bind him to humble him, and we will each give you 1,100 pieces of silver.
All right. So that's good for now. So what do we got here? After this. So again, some time has probably passed. It doesn't say how many days or months or years. But again, if someone rips out the city gates of your town and carries them away after killing probably a bunch of what we might call like constables or watchmen or just citizens of Gath, you're not going to right away go hang out with the Philistines again. So that's why we have that phrase after this or sometime later. And the Philistines have to be told about the fact that Samson is with this woman, Delilah. Now here's something very, very significant. For the first time in the book of Judges, we are told that Samson loved a woman. He loved her. That's never said before about his relationship with the woman in Timnah, and certainly not with the prostitute. And here you see the foundation of why Samson behaves the way he does. Now, Samson may have loved Delilah. She did not love him. And we'll see how clear that is when we get to later in the story, later in the account, but it's certainly true. Okay, told you we'd have a map. So I can almost see it better on the TV screen than I can on my computer. So I'm going to circle a few things for you if I can. Okay, so let's see. Well, that's hard to read. Okay, Gaza is down here. See that? I'm going to change colors. See that down here? There's Gaza. Mm-hmm. And then Hebron is way... Oh, see now? The video on my screen's covered. Let's see if I can draw through the video. It won't let me do that. Okay, so Hebron is in the lower right-hand corner. So it's right here. Because I'm recording, my video is in that part of the screen, so I can't draw on it. Mm-hmm. So here's Hebron. So that's about 39 miles. And down here, you've got the coastal plains next to the Mediterranean. This is the Mediterranean here. Pretty flat here. And then you start getting about here, you start getting the foothills. And you can see this on the map. So to get up here, he's not only does Samson have to carry that, he has to go uphill with it. So truly a feat of supernatural strength. And then the Sorek Valley is in here. Okay, and let's see what else. If you look on the right side here, in the middle of the right side, Bethlehem is here. That's not part of this story, but it just helps you kind of think about where things are. That means Jerusalem's going to be right up in here in this area. There's Lehi from last week, but we don't know for sure. Timnah, where he found his first bride, is in there. Or his only bride. That's those locations there. Any questions before the map is gone forever? Wayne.
Now, is there a purpose to go to Hebron with that gate?
Oh, yes, I'm so glad you asked that question. You know what my frustration is? I try to keep your study guide to 2 sheets of paper, and there's so much more I could put, so I'm so glad you asked that question. Yes, so Hebron, as I noted on the study guide, was the capital of Judah at the time. So why does Samson take it there? Samson is leading Israel, right? He's doing that for 20 years. And he takes the gate there probably to try and declare to the Judeans, look, these are the Philistines. No, These are the Philistines, and we're supposed to be driving them out of our land. There's a state of conflict here, and you're doing nothing. And so he brings that gate, boom, plops it down. And we'll see later on in Samuel, and then finally with Saul and David, the conflict gets to a new high. But we have to always remember the context of Judges. And if you go back to the first chapter and the second chapter, what were the Israelites supposed to do?
Drive them out.
Drive out the Canaanites. Take possession of the land which God is giving to you. And as we noted, it gets worse and worse. We saw it with Jephthah, and then especially with Samson, that the people kind of are just, this is just how it is. It's just how it is.
Well, St. Samson's the same way too. He's going off and finding women here, there, and yonder.
Yes,
So
he is.
I
Yep.
mean,
Yep.
he's filled like moving the people, but then he turns just the next day and downhill he goes.
Yeah, and it's not the next day, but it's the
Yeah.
next episode in the account. Yeah, because again, some time I'm sure had to take
But there
take
might have
place.
been other women we just didn't hear.
Yeah, exactly. And there were other battles we didn't hear about, I'm sure. The Philistines saw him as their great enemy. So I'm sure Samson did other acts of war that we aren't told about. Because, again, every book of the Bible tells true and accurate history, but it's telling a theological history. There's things in here for us to know for a reason, not just to say what happened, but so that we see why it happened and what God is saying to us through the text.
Now, would seeing the prostitute, would that mean that he was this one of the prostitutes of Asherah or something? Is that why?
Don't know. It doesn't give us any information. And I'm not sure if the Philistines had the same gods. We're going to see at the end of this chapter, one of their main gods is called Dagon, D-A-G-O-N. And we won't read about that tonight. It'll be next week. But so maybe in prep for next week, I can look into that and see. But in general, all the Canaanite lands, and even down to Egypt and up in Greece, they kind of had the same sort of pantheon, but they'd give them different names. Now, Baal was so well known that my guess is there was worship of Baal among the Philistine cities, but I don't know in particular if that was a big deal for them or he was just kind of on the side.
And it would seem that Delilah's a prostitute too, because the townspeople are going out, hey, seduce him.
Maybe, but you don't have to be a prostitute to seduce somebody, do you?
Yeah, but how are people going to know that how would you go up to a woman and say, hey, go seduce him?
Well, let's talk about that.
Okay, sorry.
Well, no, don't be sorry. We're going to talk about it. That's why we're here. The phrase rulers of the Philistines, as they approached Delilah, tells us that Samson was a national problem for that people group. Now, we don't know exactly what the term rulers means because they use that term, or it's used in the Bible to describe different groups of Philistines. It's only used for the Philistines, but sometimes it's used for the 5 rulers of the 5 main cities. And sometimes it's used of different peoples, different leaders, I should say. But when it says rulers of the Philistines, to me that implies it's such a big deal that the 5 leaders of the 5 big cities are all concerned about Samson. He's that big a problem for them. And as I've noted, nowhere do you see Samson rallying the troops like Jephthah did. Called out the people of Ephraim, come fight with me. He never does that. Now maybe it happened, but it's not recorded. The money paid to Delilah was an enormous amount. Now, you can look at that a number of different ways, and I'm going with the most conservative figure. If the rulers of the Philistines means the 5 rulers, and each of them promised to give her 1,100 shekels of silver, that's 5,500 shekels, right?
Right.
Now, there may be more rulers. I think it makes sense that it's just the big 5, because this was a national problem, but it could have been 10 or 30 or 100. But I'm thinking it's 5, but it could be more. So even by that very conservative amount, it's a huge sum of money. There's a Levite who is paid, and we'll see that in the epilogue to the book. He's paid 10 pieces of silver a year. 1,100 at one shot. One commentator thought it would be around $15 million.
Oh, my.
So this tells you that this is a huge problem. Now, even if it's at $1 million, it's still a huge sum of money. And so this tells you what a problem Samson was. Now, getting back to the idea of seduce him, that has nothing to do with prostitution at all. He loves her. They know this. I think Samson had a reputation about having a weakness with women. They would have known that from Timnah and from the prostitute in Gath, and there may have been others. And so they know this is his Achilles heel, so to speak. And so they're going to go after him here. They don't care what she does. And she may have been a prostitute, but there's nothing in the text that says that. And I think that's significant because it does say that at the beginning of the chapter about this prostitute he goes to see. Now, perhaps she was a prostitute, but the point of this account is that he loves her, not what she does. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, now we're going to go to verses 6 through 14. By the way, before we leave these verses 4 and 5, Delilah does not have to be threatened, does she? Now, the unnamed bride of chapter 14 is threatened. Give us the answer to the riddle, or we will burn you and your father's household to death. For Delilah, this is just a business proposition, which may imply that she's a prostitute. May also imply that she's a shrewd businesswoman. But for whatever reason, or for whatever her identity is, she did not have to be threatened. She just jumped right into it. Okay, verses 6 through 14. Anybody feel like reading? Or do you want me to do it? Ron, you got it?
So Delilah said to Samson, "Tell me the secret of your great strength and how you can be tied up and subdued." Samson answered, "If anyone ties me with 7 fresh bowstrings that have not been dried, I'll become as weak as any other man." Then the rulers of the Philistines brought her 7 fresh bowstrings that had not been dried, and she tied him with them. With men hidden in the room, she called him, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." But he snapped the bowstrings as easily as a piece of string snaps when it comes close to a flame. So the secret of his strength was not discovered. Then Delilah said to Samson, "You have made a fool of me. You lied to me. Come now, tell me how you can be tied." He said, "If anyone ties me securely with new ropes that have never been used, I'll become as weak as any other man." So Delilah took new ropes and tied him with them. Then with men hidden in the room, she called him, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." But he snapped the ropes off his arms as they were threads. Delilah then said to Samson, "All this time you have been making a fool of me and lying to me. Tell me how you can be tied." He replied, "If you weave the 7 braids of my head into a fabric on a loom and tighten it with a pin, I'll become as weak as any other man." So while he was sleeping, Delilah took the 7 braids of his head, wove them into the fabric, and tightened it with a pin. Again she called him, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." He awoke from his sleep and pulled up the pin and the loom with the fabric.
All right. So Samson begins to weaken here and give in to Delilah's persistent questioning. Now, what I find fascinating here in this first query that she gives in verse 6, tell me the secret of your strength. And what does she say? So that why? What's the purpose? Tell me the secret so that. Verse 6.
You can be tied up and subdued.
Yeah, you can be tied up and subdued. It's the exact same Hebrew words that were used by the Philistines to talk to Delilah. I'm not saying they spoke Hebrew, but I'm saying it's the exact same words in the text. So the Philistines come and say, find out how we can tie him up and subdue him. Now, different ways to translate that, but really it means torment or even torture. How can we tie him up and torture him? And she uses that same language to Samson, which is incredible to me. And he's got to know something's going on.
Yeah.
He's got to know. So, why does Samson play along? And if you don't wrestle with this question, and the commentary had some really good answers for this thing, But if you don't wrestle with this, what's easy to do with all the Samson stories? Dismiss them as fairy tales. Nobody could pull the gate out of a city and carry it on his back 39 miles. That's just a made-up story. Nobody could tear a lion apart. It's just a made-up story. And you get to hear it, and same thing. I mean, how dumb do you have to be
Yeah,
to not figure it out?
yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah, so why does he play along?
Is it because he knows his strength and he knows what he can do and that doesn't matter?
Maybe. But then why would he get closer and closer and closer to revealing the truth?
He could be falling deeper and deeper in love.
Yeah, so number one, Samson wants someone to trust, a soulmate. Remember, this is the first time in the text that he's described as loving someone. Samson loved this woman named Delilah. He's never experienced that before, or if he has, the text didn't record it. But before, he saw a woman and said to his parents, "Get her for me for a wife." And I think Beth was probably in the right track there. This probably has to do with lust. She's hot. I want to marry her. He goes into Gaza, chapter 16. He sees a prostitute. Again, there's no sense of thinking things through about marriage or the prostitute. He just sees her and he goes. He goes in to see her. He's impulsive. This is different. And if you have someone you trust, what do you do with them?
Tell them everything.
You tell them everything. That's right. And Samson yearns for that, just like any other human. He wants someone to trust. And then the second thing is, Samson is aroused by danger, not repelled by it. I mean, when the spirit rushes on him and he's ready to fight some Philistines, he's not going, "Oh, I don't really want to do this." He goes for it. Yeah, these guys are hiding around the house in Gaza, and then they're at the city gate. And by the way, I was looking at some photos, and I didn't think to put them in today. I should have, but the city gate probably went through however thick the wall was. A wall could be as thick as from me to that wall. It could be all wall. And then you'd have a gate, kind of arch that would go through there, and you could have a door on each end. I mean, this was not like breaking through a little door. And there's men probably at both gates. So he doesn't shy away from violence at all. And so the one commentary that I read said these are probably two good reasons why Samson went along. And I think he's right on. And the text, because it points out that he loves this woman, and we'll see more indications of that later in some of the Hebrew vocabulary that may or may not come through in your translation. The three false statements Samson makes gradually move closer to the truth. You especially see that in the third one. But the first one is, I need some fresh bowstrings. And then it's, some ropes to tie me up that have never been used. And then he says, the 7 locks of hair. You got to imagine, I don't know how old the guy is, but he's judged Israel for 20 years, so he's probably at least 40. If he starts doing his thing when he's 20, we first start reading about him. So, 40 years of hair, braiding it, and probably weighed. That's why he was so strong. He had to carry that hair around all the time. But he's got all this hair in 7 braids. 7, again, is the number of completeness for God. And so he's getting very close there to divulging the truth. He puts his hair into her hands. That's just a thread. You're hanging by a thread there. Or maybe I should say by a hair. And so, I wrote that in the study guide. The 7 braids of hair brings Samson perilously close to revealing the secret of his strength. Right? We are flying tonight. I didn't think I'd go this fast. All right, verses 15 to 22. Anybody feel like reading?
I can.
Okay.
And she said to him, "How can you say I love you when you won't confide in me? This is the 3rd time you have made a fool of me and haven't told me the secret of your great strength." With such nagging, she prodded him day after day until he was sick to death of it. So he told her everything. "No razor has ever been used on my head," he said, "because I have been a Nazarite, dedicated to God from my mother's womb. If my head were shaved, my strength would leave me and I would become as weak as any other man." When Delilah saw that he had told her everything, she sent word to the rulers of the Philistines, Come back once more. He has told me everything. So the rulers of the Philistines returned with the silver in their hands. After putting him to sleep on her lap, she called for someone to shave off the 7 braids of his hair, and so began to subdue him, and his strength left him. Then she called, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. He awoke from his sleep and thought, I'll go out as before and shake myself free. But he did not know that the Lord had left him. Then the Philistines seized him, gouged out his eyes, and took him down to Gaza. Binding him with bronze shackles, they set him to grinding grain in the prison. But the hair on his head began to grow again after it had been shaved.
All right, thank you. Okay, so what happens here? Verse 15 reveals that Samson had professed his love for Delilah. Not only does the text earlier say he loved her, this verse tells us that he said to her that he loved her. This is something we miss in the stories of or the account of Samson, because we go right to his feats of strength, and we're not seeing what's going on underneath there, and that's pretty important. And of course, she uses guilt to get him. As she continues to nag him, think about if he wants someone to trust, it's as if today someone might say, if we were really soulmates, you would tell me everything. Don't you trust me? And that's what she's doing here. Now, it's helpful to remember that the events of verses 6 to 17 probably occurred over quite some time. That helps us to understand his reactions. That may be an alarm. Let me pause this. Okay, so if we remember that this occurred over a lengthy period of time, it can be very, very helpful.
Did you turn it back on?
I did.
The camera.
Because when we read it quickly without thinking, we go, well, like one night she says, tell me, and he says bowstrings, and then the next night he says ropes, and then the next night she weaves his hair in a loop. This probably took place over a period of time. Because, and the other thing I forgot to mention too, it says she had Philistines hidden in the room. That's probably not the best translation. What it refers to a room in the house. So she's got some guys in a secret room he doesn't know about, or if he knows about it, he doesn't know that there's people there in the moment. And the other clue that we have that this took quite a bit of time is when he finally does tell her everything, she has to summon the rulers of the Philistines back. Come back. They've left. They've said, yeah, it's not happening. And so this could be weeks, even months, maybe, possibly even something like a year, as she continues to try 1, 2, 3. Then she gets upset and nags him day after day after day after day after day. So that's helpful when you think about this, because it lends some realism to it. When we get to verse 16, how is Samson described there toward the end of that verse?
He was sick to death of her nagging.
Yeah, sick to death of her nagging. Somebody have a different translation? Wayne?
His soul was vexed to death.
Yeah, that's a good literal translation, and that's what I put up on the screen. Samson's soul was vexed to death. I mean, it's to the point where I can't even stand it anymore. So again, this tells you that he's holding out for a long time. This wasn't something that, again, on day 4, he finally told her. No, she's after him every stinking day. Maybe for months before he finally breaks down. Let's look at chapter 10, verse 16. We see this exact phrase used in another context. So here, this is the beginning of the Jephthah account, and the Israelites have gone out after all these other gods. They cry out to God, and he says, forget about it. I'm done with you. And then we get down to 10:16. What does it say there? Somebody read that.
So they put away the foreign gods from among them and served the Lord. and he became impatient over the misery of Israel.
Yeah, and it's actually the exact same Hebrew phrase. Yahweh was vexed to death, if you will. I mean, not to death, but same verb is used there. He's vexed in the same way. So he's sick of it. And that helps us understand chapter 10 a little bit. When you want to understand how a word is used and what it means, you always look in the context of that chapter and then that book, the same author, right? And that's why when we were back there in chapter 10, the NIV translation, he could bear their misery no longer. Well, he's exasperated. He's vexed. He's had it. But he still loves them. And so Samson is in this place of just being absolutely sick of it. So I don't know if you can think in your life of an example where something or someone was bugging you day after day after day. It wasn't something that would just blow you away on day 1, but after day 30 or day 60 or day 100, you were just fed up. And that's where Samson's at. Barry Webb, in his commentary on Judges, has this great quote. Delilah has already taken his hair in her hands. Now she asks for his heart. You say you love me, but you won't be honest with me. What kind of love is that?
Yeah.
Give me your heart. And it says literally, Samson announced to her all his heart. And I'm trying to find the verse here in English. Let's see. Verse 17. So he told her everything. Wayne, what about your translation? Verse 17.
17, as soon as he had finished speaking. Oh, I'm on 15, sorry.
Yeah, got to get back to chapter 16.
16, 17 says, I still haven't found it. And he told her all his heart.
Yeah, that's much better. Because that's why is that word used? Because he loves her. It doesn't just mean, yes, he told her everything. But what he's doing now is he's saying, yes, I want you to be my soulmate. I love you. I'm going to share my deepest, most important secret. Now, in a healthy relationship, that's a really good thing. This is not a healthy relationship. And Samson, either he knows that, but he wants to believe it and he does it anyway, or he doesn't see that it's only on his part, not hers.
And there doesn't seem to be any God in this relationship.
Exactly. So the cutting off of Samson's hair would mean cutting off his dedication to Yahweh. It was an outward sign of what God had told his parents. He will be a Nazirite, which means someone dedicated to God all his life. Much like Samuel, the little priest, as a little boy, Hannah dedicated Samson to serve the Lord all his life. Now, Samuel did much better than Samson. And at this point, Samson, well, I've got some stuff written here that'll do it. So Samson puts his heart, his trust, right? Because the heart is where you trust. The heart in the Bible, Hebrew and Greek, the heart is not just emotion, but it's where you make decisions. It's where your will is located. It's where you weigh things and make value judgments. And so he gives that to her, and he places his heart, his trust in her rather than in Yahweh. And verse 18 uses the phrase, all his heart, twice. So in verse 18, when Delilah saw that he had, well, Wayne, read it in your translation. It's much better than my NIV.
And he was very thirsty, and he called upon the
No.
Lord. 18?
Verse 18 of chapter 16.
Oh, jeez. Then Delilah saw that he had told her all his heart. He sent and called the lords of the Philistines. And
She
come
did,
up
yeah.
again. She called, come up again, for he has told me all his heart.
All his heart. So that little phrase is used 3 times, just twice in that verse. And once we see that, it's like, oh, duh, right? We get it. But when it just means he told her everything, it doesn't have nearly the punch, does it? And so this is one case where the ESV has a better translation than the NIV. Because it's all his heart. So he's laying himself wide open. I love you. I'm giving you my deepest secret. And you could destroy me with this, but I don't think you will. Or at least I hope you won't. Maybe he's never been in love before. Now, we'll come back to that question that I had in the introduction. So, why does he do this? Does Samson simply want to have a normal life? I mean, is he hoping that maybe he can settle down and get married and have kids and just be a regular guy? Because if you think of the burden that he carried around, to be sure, he enjoyed the strength. He at times would be able to do great feats, and he was leading Israel, but maybe he just wanted to have a house with some kids. And I think about it, this is this will be a very dated illustration just to our culture now, but think of all the Marvel movies with all the superheroes, and you see at the end of the last movie, Captain America wants to have a normal life, and he goes back in the past and he has a normal life with the woman he loves. Is that what Samson wanted? And then a follow-up question is, have you ever wanted to avoid the burden of living the faith? God has called you to do something. But maybe as a parent, you in the midst of maybe the worst couple of months or maybe year that you've had with a child, and you think, can I just have like a 2-month vacation from my child? And of course, our kids say the same about us, I'm sure. Or maybe you're leading a Bible study or you're leading some administrative group in a church, and you go, I just don't want the responsibility anymore. I just don't. And sometimes you feel that way. So maybe we can understand a little bit better why Samson's doing what he's doing. He loves the game. I'm sure that was exciting for him. He loves the woman, and that intimacy. I mean, that's what is so important in any good relationship. And by intimacy, I don't mean sex. I mean, you share all your heart. That's the foundation of intimacy. Maybe that's what he wants. It's very interesting. Now, verse 19 shows that Delilah clearly took the lead in subduing Samson. So let's see here. So she is the one who gets him to, I'm looking at my translation here. She puts him to sleep in her lap, and she summons a man, but then it says she is the one who started shaving his head. Now, our translations don't accurately reflect that necessarily. Right? My NIV says she called a man to shave off the 7 braids of his hair. Wayne, does yours see anything different in verse 19?
No, same thing. She called the man.
And then what does it say next?
Shave off 7 locks of his
To shave off?
Yeah, and had him shave off.
Okay. So literally the Hebrew says she summoned a man and she shaved the 7 locks of his head. So, I think and I don't think that's a mistake. She had the guy there, maybe as a barber, brought his razor over. Maybe he was going to do it, but she's the one who did. And so again, this shows clear she does not love Samson. Either she hates him, and I think kind of she does. And by the way, the text never says that she is a Philistine, but it certainly implies it, doesn't it? The rulers of the Philistines are coming to her. So she has him fall asleep in her lap. She summons a man. She cuts off his hair. And then she begins to torment him. She's the one who does that. Isn't that interesting? My text again, so she began to subdue him. But she begins to do that. She's subduing him. Yeah, she began to torment and subdue him. All right. Verses 19 and 20, when you look at them together, show us that Yahweh was Samson's strength, not the hair. So at the end of verse 19, what does it say? The very end. What began to happen?
His strength left him.
His strength left him. And what does it say at the end of verse 20?
But he did not know that the Lord had left him.
Say that again, Paula.
But he did not know that the Lord had left
Yeah,
him.
so his strength had left him because the Lord had left him. And we know that from reading the last few chapters, right? What happened when the lion came at him? What happened when the Philistines began to attack him? What does the text say?
The Lord was upon him.
Yeah, the Holy Spirit rushed upon him. So very clearly, the source of his strength was not his hair. Now, the hair was a sign of being a Nazarite dedicated to Yahweh for all his life. So it's not that it was unimportant, but that was not the source of his strength. Yahweh was the source of his strength. Now, something very interesting as I was studying this text the last few days was I realized that Samson's behavior reflects Israel's behavior. In the book of Hosea, Israel is often described as Yahweh's faithless wife. I said that on Sunday, and that is by far the most common metaphor. But there is another image that God uses to describe Israel, and that is as Yahweh's firstborn son. That comes out of the Exodus, where Yahweh says, I'm going to take my firstborn son, the people of Israel, and you're not letting me, so I'm going to kill your firstborn sons in Egypt. And so you see that in a few places throughout the Old Testament. And in Hosea, when Hosea is talking about the Exodus, he actually says, out of Egypt, God says, out of Egypt I called my son. And so Samson is called to be separate to the Lord, to be dedicated to the Lord all his life. Israel is called to be God's people, living differently. You think about the covenant, the commandments. Why are those there? Because it makes you different. The sign of circumcision, it makes you different. You're going to be my people. And so Samson and Israel are the same in that way. The problem is Israel goes whoring after other gods, right? Samson goes after these other women. He won't marry an Israelite girl. His parents even say, why can't you marry an Israelite girl? Why can't you marry a believer? Oh, I see her, I want her. Israel, I see Baal, I want Baal. I see Asherah, I want Asherah. Very, very similar, very impulsive, very reckless. Now, when Samson goes to Gaza, he's treated like an animal. Usually you would take some beast of burden, a donkey or something, and the way you would grind grain is you'd have a round stone like this table, and then you have another one that was tilted up on its side like a wheel, and it would be fastened to a pole that would be hooked to the center. So the wheel would turn on this pole and go round and round, and you could just dump grain on there, and then you would grind the grain with that big heavy millstone. That's why it was called a millstone. And Samson has to do that work. Instead of a donkey, they make a donkey out of him. They treat him like a beast of burden or some animal. But there is also a note or a sign that Yahweh is not finished with him. His hair begins to grow. Now again, it's not magic. It's not a magic spell that his hair produces the power. But the hair is a reminder that he was to be dedicated to God. This is that little glimmer of hope. Now, next week, we're going to be looking at how he dies. And then we'll also do a summary of all the judges. I'm going to get a chart. I'm going to list all their names. And we saw when we were looking at Jephthah that there's some very minor names that are mentioned. And we'll only very briefly mention them, if at all. But I'll have those for you there. But this will be a great time for us to look at all 12 judges, remembering that they're from all 12 tribes. What does this say to us as we wrap up this part of Judges, right before we get to the dual epilogue of chapters 17 through 21, I believe. Okay, so anything else tonight? Any questions about our materials or chapter 16?
He must have been very, very disillusioned and hurt when this happened about Delilah.
Oh, yeah.
He must have been just really, really down and everything.
Yep. Yeah, one of the commentaries noted that he may not have had his eyes put out right away on the spot, although it's certainly possible. We just don't know. But if you think about it, and he kind of mirrors Israel that way, doesn't he? That Israel can't see how stupid they are. And what is one of the refrain in the book of Judges? They did what was right in their own eyes, and what they did was evil in the eyes of Yahweh. And so Samson loses his sight. Israel loses its sight. Israel forgets who they are. Yeah, it must have been terribly disillusioning. You finally love somebody, and you think that she loves you. You open your heart to her, and it gets you killed. So yeah, it must have been really, really down. He must have been really down. And then when he dies, and you probably recall that, he actually says, "Just let me die with my enemies." So Samson's not looking to escape. He's not looking to live. He's ready to end it by killing his enemies. at the end of the chapter. Other thoughts or questions from today? I think I've got some. See, I got some summary questions for us here. Oop. Okay, so the first commandment is you shall have no other gods. And Martin Luther writes in the Catechism the meaning for that. It's the shortest one. As a kid, when I was in confirmation, I always liked it because I could memorize it easily. The other ones are much more difficult. We should fear, love, and trust in God above all things. And Samson does not keep this commandment, does he? Nor does Israel. He puts his love in Delilah, and he's willing to give up his relationship with Yahweh if that means he might have a relationship with her. And that's pretty sobering, isn't it? And I guess it helps us to really be grateful for having a believing spouse, someone who trusts in Christ, who will not pull us away from that. Because if you don't have a believing spouse, then you kind of have to make choices. What do you do on Sunday morning? That's a very simple thing, right? It's Sunday morning, and maybe your spouse says, "Oh, let's go out for brunch. It'll be great. We haven't done anything for a couple of weeks together, but you want to worship." How do you make that decision? And that's just a small example. And maybe if that couple has children, I want to take the children and have them be baptized. And the unbelieving spouse doesn't really care, but why don't you just wait till they're older and they can decide? It really causes problems for you. And so again, with our children, our grandchildren, we want to encourage them as much as possible to marry a believing spouse. Now, Samson appears to have been on his own. To have been, type it right. Okay, I can't even type. Have be on his own. Must have been tired when I wrote that one. We never see people coming to aid him, ever.
Coming to what?
To aid him, to give him help.
Uh-huh.
How can we be defended and helped in our times of weakness? Let's look up a couple of passages from the New Testament. First one is Galatians chapter 6, verses 1 and 2. Galatians 6, verses 1 and 2. Brothers, if someone is caught in a sin, you who are spiritual should restore him gently. But watch yourself, or you also may be tempted. Carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. So if you were to put that in your own words, what is the book of Galatians teaching us about how to help defend a brother or a sister, help that individual in times of weakness, or if we need the help? What is it saying there?
Approach them in love and
Yes.
support them.
Yeah, approach them in love. So it's easy to become indignant or self-righteous when we see somebody else sin, because honestly, that makes us feel a little bit better on the inside. But what does this direct us to do? Approach them gently with love. So it means we have to have conversations. We have to love each other enough to be honest about what's going on.
You need to be in a relationship.
Yes, you do. Yeah, you can't spring this on somebody if you don't have a relationship with them.
Yeah, you can't walk up to somebody and say, "Hey, I love you, and you're doing this." That's not going to, generally won't work.
Yeah. So in other words, we can't be anonymous at church.
Right.
One of the attractions of mega churches, and I totally understand this, is that you can be anonymous. You can go every Sunday there for a couple of years, and if you don't get involved in any of the small groups or something, you don't have to know anybody, and it's very, very safe. But in the church, if we are the body of Christ, and we are, that means then that we have to have relationships, just like Wayne said. All right, let's look at James 5, verse 16. James 5:16. Therefore confess your sins to each other and pray for each other so that you may be healed. The prayer of a righteous man, and I would say of a righteous woman as well, is powerful and effective. So again, in your own words, what is that verse teaching us about how we can be defended and helped in our times of weakness?
Confess to another believer and ask for them to pray for you with you.
Yep. And be willing to give that prayer. And, Paul, you said that just beautifully and just right, but it's so easy to say and so hard to do, isn't it? I mean, think about the anxiety and the temptations going on right now in our culture. I just did a little bit of research, and the CDC, even back in June and July, was saying alcohol abuse, substance abuse. We've all read about child abuse and neglect and spousal abuse and neglect. They're all up. Suicides are up. Because we're all stressed. If someone is tempted to get into drugs or do too much drinking, how easy is that to confess to each other? It's super hard. It's super hard.
Yeah, you don't want to tell people in church that you're weak.
That's right. You feel ashamed. How can I tell someone in church that I'm weak? And yet, what do we do at the beginning of almost every worship service?
Confess.
We confess our sins. I am by nature sinful and unclean. I am a poor, miserable sinner. I've sinned against you in thought, word, and deed. What are we saying? I'm weak. And it's safe because it's a corporate confession. But when I go to a brother or sister, or when I do individual confession with my pastor, there's not 100 other people next to me saying the same thing. It's just me. But I'll tell you what, as painful as that can be and as frightening as it can be, it's also extremely healing. Extremely healing. So if you have a good, close Christian friend that you can trust, by all means, if you can trust that they'll be very confidential and not talk to anybody else, they're not a Delilah, right? Then take advantage of that. And you can certainly come to your pastors and do the same. We take an oath at ordination to never divulge what is confessed to us. So it can be an extremely healing thing. And that can help us a lot in times of weakness or when we are under attack. How can we learn to rely on God's strength and not our own? Let's look at Romans 5, 3-5 and 2 Corinthians 1, 8, 9. First one is Romans 5, 3-5. And if you're watching this on video and I'm talking too fast, just pause the video, look up the reference, and then play again when you're there. So Romans 5, 3-5. Not only so, but we also rejoice in our sufferings, because we know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance, character, and character, hope. And hope does not disappoint us, because God has poured out his love into our hearts by the Holy Spirit, whom he has given us. So what does that teach us about relying on God's strength and not our own? And note the question out, how can we learn to rely on God's strength and not our own? What does this verse teach us? What's the context of the growth that Romans 5, 3-5 talks about?
Well, rejoice in suffering. That's
Suffering.
what we're now.
Suffering. That's the context. Now, what do we usually do with suffering? We run away as fast as we can, right? We try to avoid it whenever possible. And the Bible is not teaching us that we should seek out suffering and pain. Not at all. But we tend to run away from suffering. And what the Bible's teaching us is that sometimes in suffering, that's when you learn to rely on God's strength. Why? Because you can't fix the problem.
Yeah.
If you've got an illness, a serious illness, you can't just snap your fingers and take it away. If your boss comes to you and says, hey, sorry, we're downsizing and we got to let you go, you can't fix that. If your child is struggling emotionally and really hurting and hurting others, you can't just snap your fingers and fix that. And so the time of suffering is going to last. And because of that, that's when you learn to rely on God's strength. And that's a blessing. All right, let's look at 2 Corinthians 1, 8 and 9. So we got Romans, then we got 1 Corinthians, then we got 2 Corinthians. So 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 8 and 9. We do not want you to be uninformed, brothers, about the hardships we suffered in the province of Asia. We were under great pressure, far beyond our ability to endure, so that we despaired even of life. Indeed, in our hearts we felt the sentence of death. But this happened that we might not rely on ourselves, but on God, who raises the dead. So what's the context there?
For they were afflicted.
Okay.
and had a great burden, and they were so much despair that they were wishing they were dead.
Yeah, or maybe they thought they were going to. So they were this close to dying, or maybe wanted to die. And so again, great burden, great affliction. Paul writes in another letter, he talks about being spared from the lions. We don't know if he's speaking literally or metaphorically, but there are lots of Christians who lost their lives. And so how can we learn to rely on God's strength in moments of such weakness, even at death? And think about this. When you die, and I just want to let you guys know, if Jesus doesn't come back before this happens, you are going to die. You all recognize that?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, good. Just want to make sure. We live in a culture that's running from coronavirus, terrified, because we are terrified of death. Now, yes, we should quarantine and medication and all that. But Christians have this wonderful blessing that even when we face death, that ultimate weakness, when you're dying and there's nothing you can do about it, that's why it's so terrifying if you're relying on your own strength. But if you're relying on God's strength, God raised Jesus from the dead, he's going to raise me from the dead. And I've seen it in Christian after Christian after Christian. When they die, they're at peace. And there's a great deal of hope in that. It's really good stuff.
Pastor,
Yes.
one thing that just always troubles me is, why does God allow devout Christians to suffer over and over and over again, and then you see unbelievers where they sail in life? My dad's a good example. He's 91 years old, refuses to believe. He was in the hospital for the first time in his life last year, the first time he had surgery to put a pacemaker in. He really has skated through life. It hasn't suffered that I know of at all, and doesn't believe. And then I have a friend today that her son was rushed for an emergency appendectomy. This kid, he got in an almost fatal car accident, almost died of MRSA. It's just been one thing after another, and I just really grapple with this question.
Yeah. Well, the quick answer is we don't know. But what's interesting about that, Paula, is that there is a psalm that actually raises that very, very question. And I wish you could remember which one it is, and I can't off the top of my head. My memory's just unfortunately not that good. But there is a psalm that raises that very question. And he says, but as for me, my foot had almost slipped. In other words, I almost lost my faith because I saw the wicked prospering, going about with no worries, while the righteous suffer. And I'm paraphrasing. And so he talks about this for a few verses, and he's very upset. He's very discouraged. And then it says, and I might get this wrong, but it's something about I was in the sanctuary, and then I realized their end. And so he's in a house of worship. I'm assuming the temple or maybe the tabernacle. And he looks and he realizes, wait a minute, there's the answer. That God rules, God is gracious to his people, and in the end, I know it's going to be right. And while that doesn't specifically answer why this person skates through and this person has so many struggles, it helps us to understand. So when we go into our sanctuary, we look now at that beautiful front area with the cross. What does that say? It says that an innocent God who deserved no suffering took all suffering for sin upon himself and died the death that we deserved. That's not fair. And then he rose from the dead. And in mercy and love, he invites us to enjoy eternal life with him. So that can be helpful. The book of Job is a great help as well, because Job was a guy who didn't deserve any of that stuff that came on him, but Satan is the one who afflicted him. And yes, God allowed that, but Satan is the one who brought such terrible suffering on Job. And Job doesn't get an answer why at the end of the book. He's just told to remember who you are and remember who I am. So that's a very helpful book to study as well. But it's a difficult question. Why do sometimes what we would call sinful, evil people or unbelievers skate right along, and faithful Christians suffer time after time after time? And the answer is God doesn't tell us, but he tells us that it's not because he doesn't love us. We know he loves us because of Christ, his death and resurrection. And so we cling to that in the middle of the suffering. And like Romans 5 says, we know that he's working good in it. We know he's working good in it, so that gives us a little bit of help as well. All right. Well, let's close in prayer, and then we'll be done. Gracious God, we thank and praise you this night for this study and ask you to bless us as we go home. Help us to trust in you no matter what the circumstances are. Amen.
Thank you.
So we don't need to